The hard past, it's something, that shapes the world we inherit, even if we rarely stop to think about it. The modern world trains us to believe warmth is automatic. Flip a switch, turn a dial, wait a moment. But, history tells a far harsher story. In the winter of 1944, across bombed cities and frozen countryside, heat was not infrastructure. It was improvisation. Power grids were shattered. Coal trains never arrived. Wood was stripped from parks, fences, even floorboards. Cold did not announce itself with drama. It crept in, settled, and killed quietly. For millions of civilians and soldiers alike, survival came down to whether they could create and control a small, reliable source of heat with almost nothing. One of the most widespread answers was not a stove, not a fireplace, and certainly not a weapon. It was a heater, small enough to sit on a brick. A survival heat candle, crude, smoky, and astonishingly effective. If you value history as something practical rather than decorative, this channel exists for you. Take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who studies the past seriously, leave a comment with the era you want us to cover next, and subscribe to The Hard Past so these hard-earned lessons don't disappear again. Now let's get into the substance. Why cold became the real enemy of World War II civilians. By 1944, cold was no longer seasonal discomfort. It was a strategic condition. Allied and Axis bombing campaigns deliberately targeted gasworks, electrical plants, fuel depots, and rail junctions. Coal shortages crippled civilian heating across Europe. Rationing meant even intact homes went unheated. In cities like Warsaw, Hamburg, Leningrad and London, winter deaths rose not from explosions, but from exposure, illness and weakened immune systems. Soldiers in static positions suffered the same fate. Heat mattered more than morale, and fuel mattered more than food. How the survival heat candle solved a universal problem. The survival heat candle emerged independently in many places because it answered the same question everywhere. How do you convert scraps into slow, controlled heat? A normal candle wastes most of its energy upward and burns too quickly. Wartime versions re-engineered that flaw. A metal container, usually a food tin, acted as both structure and radiator. Inside it, cardboard or cloth was packed tightly, not as a wick, but as a fuel matrix. When saturated with wax or fat, it burned slowly and evenly, turning the entire can into a warm mass rather than a flickering flame. The physics that made it work when nothing else did. This device worked because it maximized surface area and thermal retention. Corrugated cardboard rolled into a dense spiral created hundreds of tiny combustion channels. Wax vaporized gradually, feeding multiple flame points at once. The metal shell absorbed the heat and radiated it outward instead of letting it escape. This wasn't theory. Diaries from occupied Europe describe rooms warming enough to keep water liquid and fingers functional. 8 to 12 hours of steady heat from a single can was common. What period records tell us about the actual formula? Cross-referencing British Home Guard pamphlets, Scandinavian civilian accounts, and Eastern European resistance manuals reveals a remarkably consistent ratio. For a standard 1-pound tin, roughly 3 parts, melted wax, to 1 part cardboard by volume produced the most stable burn. In fuel-scarce regions, rendered animal fat, tallow, or recycled candle stubs were substituted. Some added pine resin for longevity. Others mixed a small amount of salt to reduce smoke. This was communal engineering refined under pressure. How people turned a single candle into a room heater. One candle warmed bodies, several warmed space. The real breakthrough came when users placed 2 or 3 lit cans together and covered them with an inverted clay flower pot or perforated metal bucket. The cover absorbed heat, slowed air movement, and released warmth gradually into the room. This turned scattered flames into a crude but effective thermal mass. Post-war interviews consistently credit this method with preventing freezing indoors during prolonged outages. How to recreate it without losing the lesson. Construction today follows the same steps. A clean metal can. Cardboard cut to height and rolled tightly inside. Wax melted safely and poured slowly until fully saturated. Once cooled, lighting produces multiple steady flames and a rapidly warming container. But history is blunt about one rule: ventilation. These devices consume oxygen and produce carbon monoxide. They were used in shelters with cracked doors, drafty chimneys or broken windows. Never sealed. Survivors learned that rule the hard way. What this teaches us beyond the object itself. The survival heat candle matters because it represents a mindset modern life discourages. It wasn't patented. It wasn't standardized. It spread because people shared solutions. Neighbors adapted designs. Soldiers improvised improvements. Knowledge moved faster than supplies. This is history as a manual, not nostalgia. It reminds us that resilience comes from understanding principles, not stockpiling gadgets. If you believe the past still has something useful to teach, support this work. Subscribe to The Hard Past. Share this video with others who study history seriously and keep these hard lessons alive. When systems fail, the past often already solved the problem.